We continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Brura Hilchais Seudah. We're in the middle of Siman Kuf Ayin Dalid, learning the incredible halachas of Yayin. We are up to Sif Vav. Says the Machaber, Ein levarich acher Yayin shebesuda. There is no bracha achroina after one drinks wine during the meal. Tebirchas hamazayin paitartai. The Machaber coming along and answering the obvious kasha. We just learned that during a Seudah, even though you're in the middle of a bread meal, you have to make a bracha rishayna, a bari priya gafen on wine. So one might think, if I have to make a bracha rishayna, l'chayra, I should have to make a bracha achrayna. Says the Machaber, no, you do not make a bracha achrayna and al-gafen on wine during a meal. Why? Tebirchas hamazayin poitartoi. V'chein poitaris yayin shelofnei hamazayin. And similarly, it patters the wine before the benching. Even if you did not have within the mazin. And we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah what exactly that means. Siman reish ayin beis. Olini yayin shelav dalashef le'amazin. Ayin lekwan siman reish sadites sif ches. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, sif katan chav gimel ein levarech a bracha achron on the wine. Why? Because the birchas hamazayin paitartai. Kedin devarim habayim achmas hasuda. Like the halacha of items that come for the meal. Shenaftar birchas hamazayin. Any meal item is patterned with birchas hamazayin. K'mo shekasav siman kafayin zayin. Tayayin machmas hasuda ul chashiv. The bol is shamaychel. The wine is certainly machmas hasuda. And what the Mishnah Berurah over here is answering that the wine is not, the reason you make a bracha on wine is not like if one were to have candy in the middle of the meal, and therefore that is not considered machmas hasuda. No, the reason you're making a bracha on the wine is because it's chashiv. It's roish l'chol hamashkim, as we learned. And therefore, says the Machaber now, but when it comes to the bracha achrayna, that indeed will be pattered with the benching that one makes. Va'af de bracha rishayna mevarich al yayin. Kanal seval bracha achrayna loy. You're not going to make the bracha achrayna on the yayin. Continues the Mishnah Berurah Sivkata Chav Dalit. Shelvnei hamazin. Since the wine is coming to open one up to want to eat more, it's considered part of the meal. This has to be that you drink it in proximity to the meal. So what's going on over here is they would have a glass of wine, for example. So now, and then they would wash. And then they would have the meal. So now the question is, what? My benching, my berachas hamazon is going to go backwards on the wine lifnei hamazon. Says the Chaber, yes. Explains the Mishnah Berurah why. Because that wine, it might have been before the meal, but it was indeed part of the meal. Because what was it doing? It was opening you up to indeed eat the Seudah. Continues the Mishnah Berurah Sivkatan Chafei va'afilu loi kach sarach leimer ratza leimer. Even though then you can't say that it's considered one shtia within the meal. Why? Because they themselves are part of the meal. What about other drinks that you have before you bench, but you don't have during the meal? They would need their own bracha achrayna. Why? Excuse me, these are drinks before hamaitzi, not before benching. Excuse me. If you have a drink before hamaitzi, then it's not part of the Seudah at all, and therefore it needs its own bracha achrayna. Levad yayin sraf, except for shnab shavet liyayin to ma'ira tavis hamayich levayin bir halacha. So fascinating halacha. Again, if let's say someone would have, I don't know, a glass of milk, a glass of juice, and then he would wash, and then have a meal. Says the Mishnah Berurah, such a drink has nothing to do with your meal. So your bracha achrayna after the meal is not going to pater up that drink, as it has nothing to do with the meal, and therefore you need a bracha achrayna. Ayin the command Seif Siman Risha and Beis if Kadosh Chavav says Mishvur Sif Yod Le'inyin Kiddush the Sham Avord Gam Boy Berachas Hamazon Poitarta Vayin Beralacha Mashik Samdim Vizeh Le'inyin Yayin Shel Avdallah with guard Yayin Shel Avdallah Sif Kadosh Chavav Ratzalei explains the Mishnah. What's the novelty that we're coming to point out over here with regard to the wine of Abdallah? Because they're not part of the meal. You shouldn't make another bracha. And whether Birchas Hamazon paters wine after the meal, that's what I was mentioning before. This is the right place. Before, again, we were talking about before you wash. Now we're talking about what if I have wine after the meal, after the Gemar has Seudah, but I didn't bench yet. Yeshteos b'paiskim, says Mr. Yesh, everything Birchas Hamazon patarta b'stama. Benching does not pater. And you have to make a bracha achrein on the wine. Im lo shekimin behed Birchas Hamazon lifter gama yayin, unless you explicitly had in mind to pater it. Does pater b'diavad. Kimavor b'simin reishchas asiv zayin yuzayin. So I'm saying no. You don't have to make a bracha achrein on that wine. Birchas Hamazon does indeed pater to b'stam aflechatchila. Miu ein din zeh matzoi beinenu. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this din is not common. This is the reason why for the first few minutes over here, everyone was wondering what's going on over here. We don't have such an entity. We eat all the way to we bench. We don't have a mitzvah, says the Mishnah Berurah. We'll get to this in Kofa Zayin that we remove ourselves from the past, and because we don't have such a mitzvah, therefore anything that's eaten until benching will be included in the Birchas Hamazon. Imkein Avei Akol Kibzoi Chasuda Birchas Hamazon Poitarto Miu Be'emes Lechatchila. Tov Yosef Shechavin Beis Birchas Hamazon Lifter, says Mishnah Berurah, there is a Lechatchila to have in mind during benching that you want the benching to pater up these items that you had which weren't fully part of the Seudah. So let's go back for a moment and let's see a little bit of the Dirshu. Dirshu number 25 says that mistama, you don't have kavana for these items during benching. Says Dirshu 25, Zanenu, quoting the Aruch HaShulchan, the minhag is mevarich neisen es hakoyis elu sha'imdim samachlai v'imkein ein tzrich levarich aleh mishum shekein daita mitchilam. L'maisa, this is our das that we do get the wine, and therefore you would not have to make a new bracha. The Mishnah Berurah explained in Sivkat Chav Gimel that the wine is coming lishois hamaychel. Explains the Dirshu number 26, one who has a little bit of schnapps in order he wants to remove the taste of the food in your mouth. So this is a reverse. The food's not coming to open up, the food is coming to cleanse the palate. We're going to see in Sivkat Lambatas, you do not have to make a bracha rishayna, a bracha achreina when one is rugil to do this, because it's considered part of the meal because you do this all the time. Similarly, the Shartzin is going to teach us one who has a little bit of schnapps after he eats fish, in order to have a break between fish and meat. Similar over there, Rav Vosner says it's considered tafel, and therefore you do not need a new bracha, which of course is the minhag. You don't make a new shakel, you don't make a new bracha achreina. If one were to have a little bit of alcohol between the fish and the meat, etc. Note number 27 points out that we're talking about wine that's coming to increase one's taiva if one drinks him shesa yayin before the meal. But that's not why. Meaning maybe someone was listening and they're like, that's not why I have a glass of wine before my meal. Is that true? I'm not doing it to increase my appetite. So why am I having a glass of wine before the meal? For health reasons, he wants to have a glass of red wine. So he has a glass of red wine, then he washes, and then he has a meal. So is that wine patered by his benching? Says the Kaf HaChaim lechatchila should make a bracha achreina before the meal. Because it's nothing to do with the meal. Meaning, he should make his agafen, have his glass of wine, and before he washes, you should make an agafen. But b'diavad, if you forgot to, then the benching will pater, even though it's not properly part of the meal. Dirshu number 28 brings out back the question we've discussed prior. What about grape juice? Says Rav Scheinberg, he's unsure if it's considered wine. Why? Because grape juice doesn't really open up your appetite, and therefore maybe it's not considered something that's going to be included in Birchas Hamazon. Lamaiser of Yashiv says if you make kiddush on grape juice, the eight of the bir halacha to having kavana by birchas hamazon to pater that which you drink by kiddush does not work. Why? Because birchas hamazon paters with the avad, the wine. The reason is because the wine is lamaisa sayid. The wine lamaisa opens up your insides. But it says over Yashiv that doesn't work by grape juice because it's not true, and therefore it's not going to work. That eitzah. Rav Osner similarly says the same, and therefore, what's Rav Yashiv tell us to do? That if someone has wine or some grape juice in the middle of a meal, on the bracha b'ibri agavish makes by kiddush, there is some level of connection between the kiddush and that which you drink during the meal. Therefore, it will be patterned with the birchas hamazon. So what Rav Yashiv is teaching us, that if you also had a little bit to drink during the meal, that's showing that you're not just having the wine of kiddush before the meal, you're having a part of the meal, and therefore it will be battered by benching. On the other hand, if this is Karelitz writes that grape juice has a din of wine for everything, and that's again the more conventional understanding, that if one makes kiddush and grape juice, if one drinks grape juice during the meal, this is not something that he has in mind. And note number 29, finally we conclude, if someone has a half hour before the Seudah, says Rav Yashiv, you should bench, you should make a bracha achrona, but if you had within a half hour, then it's a suffix, maybe it's pater. And again, this is the suffix that we're talking about, whether this is considered part of the Seudah or not. Let's continue. No, let's leave Sif Zayin and we'll do Sif Zayin in the next year.